Welcome to the Influential Personal Brand Podcast. This is the place where we help mission-driven messengers just like you learn how to build and monetize your personal brand. My name is Rory Vaden, and I'm the co-founder of Brand Builders Group, a Hall of Fame speaker, and New York Times bestselling author. And this show is to help experts learn how to become more wealthy and well-known. I know you're going to love it. Thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Influential Personal Brand Podcast. AJ Vaden here, getting to interview my one and only, the only Rory Vaden. This is apparently our annual podcast together because we did one last year and we are doing one this year. Y'all, I have asked Rory's permission to interview him as my guest on this episode because we have found ourselves immersed in this unexpected world of publishing over the last, really, I guess 15 years now. Unexpected for me, maybe not for Rory. And as we have discovered some things that we find are really important to us as we're writing our next book, and as we've been working with so many of our clients at Brand Builders Group, trying to decipher the best way to publish their book and to write their book, it drew out some interest in us of going, maybe we're not just authors in this space. Maybe we have a bigger role to play in this space. We've published traditionally before. We will not do that next time. I'll reserve what we are doing as a part of the interview. But through this 15-year, kind of adventure in the world of publishing, we've learned a lot. And we wanted to share some of that with you today. And that's why I invited Rory on to be my guest, is to help reveal some very exciting things that we have going on in the world of publishing, but to also help everyone understand just the state of publishing. Like, what does the industry look like today? And what does it take to hit a bestseller list? And what is required of the author versus the publisher? And where are we at? And so that's what we're going to cover today. So if you're listening and you are thinking to yourself, I want to write a book one day, this is for you. If you're listening going, I'm in the middle of writing a book, this is for you. If you've already written a book and you're in the middle of launching your book, this is for you. So in other words, anyone who will ever write a book, this episode is curated very specifically for you. So Rory, thank you for setting aside some time to come and talk with me today. This is an added bonus, get an extra hour of my day with you, which is also great. But also, I believe that, I'm not saying this biased because I'm your wife and your business partner, but I believe you have figured out something in the world of publishing that no one else has cared to or has done the work to. But what you have been able to curate, discover, uncover, and systematize is nothing short of revolutionary, due to a deep desire of knowing how to do this better for yourself and for others. And so that's what I want to talk about on the show today. So welcome to your show.
Thank you, babe. I'm so excited about this. I'm spending an extra hour with you.
Yes,
and
this will be super
as
fun.
you know, I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd on this topic. So this will be so fun.
Yeah. And so what I want to do first, really quickly, is make sure everyone has like a solid background on our history in the publishing world as authors. And so very quickly, because we don't have a ton of time and we have a lot to cover, can you just walk everyone through your journey to becoming a published author, and not just that, but a New York Times bestselling author, and then a follow-up with a national bestseller? Walk us through how that come about.
Yeah. So really quick, not talking about it, how it came about. Basically, the first product that I ever produced was like audio CDs. But then the second product was a self-published book. And it was the very first skill that I did where I did speaking for money, was called How to Be Funny to Make More Money. That was the subtitle of the book. So the book was called No Laughs, N-O to No Laughs, K-N-O-W, No Laughs to No Laughs, How to Be Funny to Make More Money. And I taught the psychology of laughter and what makes people funnier, which was something that I had to learn how to do. And so we self-published that book in 2007. Then
Is this book available for purchase anywhere?
no, we have buried it deep into the archives, because it was truly self-published, which means we controlled all the editorial, we controlled all the creative, we found our own printer, we did everything. We registered the ISBN number.
That's what it meant to self-publish, not
Mhm.
necessarily self-publishing today, but
Yeah, and we had to select the type of paper that we used, and there's 100 million decisions you have to make when you self-publish a book that you don't even realize you have to make to turn it into a physical book. So there was that book. Then Take the Stairs. It was a traditionally published book. That was our first traditionally published book that came out from Penguin Random House. Long story that we don't have time for here about how we got a literary agent and then how we got a book deal. And then that process took about 3 years. And then it took about a year to write it, do the pre-sales. We released Take the Stairs in 2012. We hit #1 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, #2 on the New York Times. Then fast forward to 2015, we also released a second book with Penguin Random House called Procrastinating on Purpose, 5 Permissions to Multiply Your Time. That book was one that we fully expected to be a #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller and a New York Times bestseller, and we missed both of those lists. And we could not figure out why, which is a part of what led us to where we are today. But we did hit the indie-bound national bestseller list, so it was a national bestseller, even though we did not hit New York Times or USA Today or the Wall Street Journal, which are the big main ones. Then last year, we soft released another self-published book, which is a children's book called Be the Buffalo, which we haven't even really launched. It is available on Amazon, but we haven't actually done the book launch for it, but we released it so that we could print it for our kids. We used Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, which is now, the easiest way to self-publish today. And now we have our new book that will be coming out. We're tentatively slating around July of 2025, which is the book you and I are writing together. And we have left traditional publishing and we are now hybrid publishing. And we can talk more about that, but hopefully that's what you're looking for.
yeah, and I think this is really important. And I think there's a couple of things that I just kind of want to highlight in our journey of publishing is we have now published in all the formats. I think that's a part of going. One of the things that we really believe in fact, the message that we have at Brand Builders Group is teach what you know. And that's a really core and central part of what we believe is that if we don't know it, we likely won't be talking about it, definitely not teaching it. But when we do talk about something and when we do teach something, it's likely due to firsthand experience through success and failures more than successes often, but you have to fail in order to succeed. And so I think it's one of those things of as we speak to this isn't in theory, this isn't abstract, it's not what other people said. This is our direct experience. And I think that's a really important context for the rest of this interview today is we have gone through the trials, tribulations of all different formats of publishing. And our biased opinion is not meant to influence yours, but it's to give you facts. All right. So we have our own opinions. We will reserve those for private conversations, but we will keep this high level and factual of expectations. And that's where we want to start is, today there is a very, very feasible way to get your book published in 3 very distinct formats. There is traditional publishing, right? Which means you are working with a New York publishing house. There is hybrid publishing, which means you have some investment, the publisher has some investment. And then there is self-publishing. And there is no easier time in the history of our country. We live in the United States. I'm talking specifically about the United States to get your book published than ever before. Right? There was a time not that long ago that if you wanted to publish your book, you had one option. And they got to decide if your book was good enough to get out into the world. That's not how it is today. And that is good, right? That is powerful. Now, it also comes with pros and cons at every different level. And that's what we really want to talk about. So here's my question for you, Rory. Can you just break it down and help explain what is self-publishing, what is hybrid publishing, and what is traditional publishing in a way that someone who's never gone through this experience could understand at a high level?
Absolutely. So basically, if you start with traditional publishing, here's the advantages. The advantages are they pay you to write the book. So they pay you in advance against future royalties. And then you have to earn out that advance before you ever make more money, but you never have to pay back your advance if you don't, out earn it. So they pay you in advance to write the book. Then they own the book. They actually own the intellectual property of those words in that order, which means they have exclusive right of where to print it, how to print it. They get to have final sign off on the title of the book. They get to have final sign off on the editorial, meaning the words in the book and what gets included and what doesn't get included. They also have the final say on the creative editorial, which is like the book cover, the way that the diagrams inside the book are laid out, how big the pages are. They control the creative, they control the editorial. They also distribute the book. So there's a whole network in traditional publishing, which is publishers make the books, and then they send those books to distributors. Those distributors send those books out to retailers, and then consumers go and buy those books. And traditional publishers have a sales team that also calls on retailers and tries to convince retailers to stock their books on the shelves, of what's new and exciting coming out. And it's like there's a whole retail chain. Some of the other great things about traditional publishing are the quality of the books is really high. It's some of the best editors in the world. The distribution is one of the top things, which is that your book becomes available in airports and brick and mortar bookstores, and can be translated into other languages. And there's foreign rights deals, and sometimes those become movies and things. So that's the fundamentals of traditional publishing. Let's talk about self-publishing next, because it's basically the opposite of all of that. So in self-publishing, you don't get paid in advance. You have to pay. And why do you have to pay? Because you have to pay to print the books. First of all, you have to pay to write the book, right? So either you're going to write it, or you're going to hire a writer, and you're going to pay that out of your pocket. Then you're going to hire an editor. You're going to pay that out of your pocket. Then you're going to pay someone to lay out the words on a page. That's called typesetting. You have to pay for that. Then you pay for the graphic design of putting in the charts and tables and pull quotes. Then you have to pay for the design of the cover. Then once you actually have the book made, and you have to find suppliers for all of those pieces, then you have to pay to print the books, right? And the good news is that you get to control that. And so the price to print the books might be lower. It might be like, say $4 to $5 per book if it's a hardcover book. But if you print 10,000 units at $5 each, you come out $50,000 just to get 10,000 copies of your own book. So you have to pay all the money is the downside. The upside is you have full control. You get to say whatever you want. You get to have final authority on the cover. The other downside, though, is you don't have distribution. Now, with Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, they have made it super easy to do a lot of that stuff. And so your book can be sold through Amazon, but it's not going to be in airports. It's not going to be in Barnes & Noble. It's not going to be in Books A Million. It's not going to be at, Parnassus Independent Bookstore in Nashville. Those places are not going to have that book. And so you're naturally going to sell less of those books because fewer people are going to see them. The other downside of self-publishing is the time it takes to figure all that out and to control all of that. The other downside of self-publishing is your book is not going to be New York Times bestseller eligible. And there's some reasons why, but predominantly it's because you will never have enough books in print available at all the necessary retail stores around the country of where that book needs to be placed so that people could buy it, so that it could all report to count for the New York Times. Um, uh, we have figured out, very few people have ever done this, but we have figured out how to help a few self-published authors hit the USA Today bestseller list, following our system that we teach. And by the way, we work with clients. We have done all three, as AJ has mentioned. We also work with clients regularly who do all three. But the dream of being a real national bestseller is pretty difficult, and it's basically impossible. There might somehow be a 1 in 100 million chance, knowing all the things we know, that we could pull it off, but it's pretty much. And the other thing is, the New York Times bestseller list specifically is, there's not only a quantity factor, there's not only a distribution factor, there is also an editorial factor. That list ultimately is not objective. The New York Times was sued many decades ago, and the way they won the lawsuit was that they publicly said it's not an empirical only list, it's an editorial list. And so they have very high editorial standards and thresholds. And so self-published books don't usually cross those thresholds, even if they did sell enough volume in the right places on the right times. So you kind of wave bye-bye to the New York Times, dream. Then there's hybrid.
Well, before we move on to hybrid,
Okay.
I do want to preface, because there are some self-publishing companies today that really do help orchestrate and organize all of the things that we just said.
Totally.
So it's not really that you're in it on your own anymore in the self-publishing world. There are many self-publishing entities that have orchestrated and put that all together for you. I think one of the things I think is important to note about self-publishing is really, what is the purpose of the book, right? And I think that's the same question you have to ask as we go through all of these is, what am I trying to achieve with this book? What's the purpose, the intended purpose of the book? And that will help a lot of going, is this self-publishing? Is it traditional? Or is it this middle thing called hybrid, which we can talk about now?
Yeah. So that's a great point. When we self-published our first book, we had to control all of that. We had to make all those decisions. Amazon, Kindle, KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing came on the scene. They have a whole process that helps facilitate a lot of that if you print through Amazon, but then Amazon gets to control the prices and things, but it helps tremendously, but you still get to own your intellectual property. That's the other big advantage of self-publishing. You own the intellectual property, so you can do whatever you want with that book. You can create derivative products of that book. You have full control. And then when we did our children's book last year, we used, as AJ mentioned, a vendor who helped coordinate. We paid them to help us with coordinating the self-publishing aspects of it. She was phenomenal. We've had her on the podcast. And I think we're probably going to create a whole children's book division here in the future, working with her, because she's so wonderful. So when you get to hybrid publishing, now, hybrid publishing is a blend of self-publishing and traditional publishing. So self-published books often are paperback, not always, but often. When you do hybrid, you have access. There's a hybrid publishing company, and a lot of hybrid publishing companies are made up of people who used to be in traditional publishing, who left traditional publishing for whatever reason to go work at a hybrid publisher. So they have a whole process to produce a book that looks like a traditionally published book, reads like a traditionally published book, feels like a traditionally published book. So if you have a good hybrid publisher, and there's a whole gradient range of hybrid publishers, and as well as gradient price points that correspond with each of those. A hybrid publisher, though, the good ones, you could have your book right next to a book from Jim Collins or John Maxwell or Brene Brown, and you really couldn't tell much of a difference, versus with a self-published book, you can almost spot it instantly. And so there's a brand equity piece of that ties into this, that hybrid publishers can help you really create. So the big difference between a hybrid and a traditional publisher is that when you hybrid publish, you also have to pay to produce the book. So you're not getting paid in advance. You have to pay the cost of producing the book. But much like a traditional publisher, you have a highly skilled team that knows how to produce the book. They also typically include editorial. So you get a top-notch editor that you don't have to go source and find yourself. They're usually included in the price that you pay, and they help you edit the book. It also typically includes some element of graphic design for typesetting the pages, designing the cover, and it's kind of sold as a package. Also, things like registering the ISBN number. Those are things that like the hybrid publisher takes care of. A lot of the like logistical technicality things that you never know you have to think of. Now, so the downside is you have to pay, but the upside is you own all of the intellectual property, more like self-publishing. So instead of signing away all of your rights, you get to own them, which means if you want to change the title of your book, if you want to change the interior of the book, if you want to change the color of the cover, you have full control to do all that in the way you would if you self-published. And you own all of the intellectual property rights to create workbooks and quote books and day planners and day timers and whatever thing you want to do, you maintain control of the IP. You can turn that, into any type of coaching program, mastermind, consulting curriculum, etc. You need no sign off from the traditional publisher. The other big advantage of hybrid publishing is the cost of the book itself. So when you self-publish, you get the books cheaper because you get to choose where they're printed. When you traditionally publish, you get an advance, but then you have to buy your own book from the publisher. And usually it's at a discount of retail. It's usually around 50% off of retail. But like even today with Take the Stairs, we have to buy our own books. Like if it's a hardcover Take the Stairs book, it costs us like $12 to buy our own book. When you hybrid publish, you get to buy the books at much closer to a cost, which means, and the reason why this matters is because if you sell the books, there's two ways to sell. There's to sell through retail channels, like stores, like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, airports, independent bookstores. That's retail channels. But then there are direct sales channels, which are like through your website or at the back of a room when you're speaking, or to your consulting clients where they buy directly from you and they pay you. When you do self-publishing or hybrid publishing, people say you can't make money from books, and that's actually not at all true when you self-publish or hybrid publish. In fact, one of my mentors, Zig Ziglar, said, the way to know which type of publishing you should do is you should ask yourself, do you want to get rich or do you want to get famous? If you want to get famous, you should try to traditionally publish. If you want to get rich, you should self-publish. But Zig told me that before the world of hybrid publishing emerged. And so what hybrid publishing allows you to do is to kind of get famous, but also get rich. Because the other advantage of hybrid publishing is, so that's normal hybrid publishing, okay? Is you pay for the book, but you own the IP. You get the books at discount, but they can be, but they look like traditionally published books, even though you still have full control. And then do you want to talk about why we went into hybrid publishing?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think that, as we're kind of like going through this interview, there's really 5 things that you need to know to write, publish, and launch a best-selling book, right? And that's what this whole episode about. And the first thing that we've been talking about is publisher type. I mean, that's the first thing that you really have to decide is like, what publisher type am I? Because that's a really important factor of if you want to have a best-selling book. And so back to purpose and intent, perhaps that's not what you care about. I think there is a reason of why to have one that we can talk about, but that's the first thing. The second thing, these are in no particular order, is the marketing of the book. The third is the selling of the book. The fourth is pub dates, when you actually publish the book. And the fifth is actually making money with the book, which is ROI, which Rory just mentioned. And as we go through this interview, you're going to get all 5 of these things. But I think one thing that's really helpful to just kind of sum up this first one, which is publisher type, is to think about it like this. My good friend, Allison Trowbridge, who has a hybrid publishing company and a self-publishing company, and also an app called Copper Books. I love how she phrases it. She goes, you have to think about self-publishing like a bootstrapped entrepreneur, right? You're figuring it out as you fall off the cliff, right? You're building it as you go and you're self-funding the whole thing, right? It's a bootstrapped entrepreneur. Skip to self-publishing, it's like private equity, right?
Or sorry, skip from self-publishing to which one? To traditional or to
traditional publishing, and it's like private equity, right? It's like you better come with a well-vetted plan of how you're going to market and sell the book, and they only want to invest on a sure thing, right? They want proof. They want to know how you're going to make money. This is a private equity. You make pennies on the dollar, but they make a lot, right? It's private equity. Then you have hybrid publishing, which is like a business partnership, right? And there's a time and a place for all of those. But I think that if you can just go, okay, bootstrapped entrepreneur, self-publishing, business partnership, right? We both have skin in the game here. This is a true partnership that's hybrid. And then private equity is like a traditional publisher. If you just want to kind of categorically think about them that way, it will help you just kind of go like, where do I fit based on my audience size, my investment abilities, my writing abilities, my timelines, the purpose of the book, all of those things really go into this really huge conversation of publisher type. Now, as Rory mentioned, we are in the middle of writing our next book, and it will be a hybrid published book. But there's more to that story because we ourselves have gotten into the hybrid publishing space. So in January of 2024, this is a sister company, it's an extension of Brand Builders Group. We launched our own hybrid publishing imprint called Mission Driven Press. Now, Rory, why did we do that? Like, why did we get into the hybrid publishing space?
Great question. And by the way, if you go to missiondrivenpress.com, there's a great table that shows you the advantages and disadvantages of self-publishing, hybrid publishing, and traditional publishing all in one table that we put together. So it sort of summarizes what we've been talking about so far at missiondrivenpress.com. So why did we get into traditional or hybrid publishing? Why would we leave one of the biggest publishers in the world where we got, we were earning over six figures in advances and we hit the New York Times bestseller list? Why would we leave that and go back to hybrid publishing? Well, there's a few reasons why. In general, hybrid publishing is a great avenue for people who are entrepreneurial minded, people who know how to run a business and know how to market, know how to sell, and know how to make money. Hybrid is really good because you get the quality and the gravitas of a really, beautiful book that looks like a New York published book, but you get the profit and the return on investment the way you do with more of like a self-published book. It's more of an investment. You're investing in and you're getting a return. The reason why we didn't hybrid publish sooner is because historically, hybrid publishing books were not eligible for the New York Times bestseller list. And there's kind of a couple reasons why I think that is. One was that they often didn't meet the editorial standards of New York Times, which are extremely high. Extremely high. You might think you're a great writer, but like it's a whole different level to get the New York Times to sign off on your book, editorially speaking. But the other reason is more practical. It's more functional, which is in order to become a New York Times bestselling author, first of all, it takes a huge number of units sold in a week. And this is something we've spent years figuring out and just trying to understand because they don't publish much information about how it works. And so, we've put together a team that tries to understand what are the ethical rules that the New York Times wants people to play by and how much does it really take to hit the New York Times. And I'll share with you a key data point. This is a proprietary data point that's been compiled by our data science team internally, that in the year 2023, okay, if you look at a full calendar year of 2023, on average, the average book that hit the New York Times, the first time it hit, sold 18,401 units in a week on average. So just that alone says you have to move a lot of units. But you also have, those units have to be sold in a variety of different places. This is a term known as distribution, meaning it can't just be 18,000 units sold through Amazon. There's got to be the New York Times. Apparently, nobody knows for sure. This is a little bit like the Google algorithm. Like nobody knows for sure, but we're using the hints they give us along with experience to kind of create a validating set of triangulated hypotheses that then become proven over time. But they have to be sold in lots of places. And self-published books are not sold in lots of places. They're usually sold on Amazon and through your own shopping cart. And your own shopping cart sales don't count for New York Times because the New York Times only recognizes certain reporting retailers. And the industry leans heavily on something called BookScan, and only certain retailers report to BookScan. So your direct sales are good while you make money on them. They do not count for the major bestseller lists when you sell through your website. The only sales that count are the officially recognized sales that happen through retail reporting outlets, typically that report through BookScan and or the New York Times. So you have to sell a huge number of units. And in order to sell a huge number of units, you have to have a huge number of units in print. Most self-published books and most hybrid publishers are never going to print that level of inventory because it's a huge risk, right? I mean, imagine if you were the publisher, if it was self-published, to go, I'm going to print 20,000 books at $5 each. That's $100,000 just to have enough inventory available to even have a chance. And it'd be super risky on the editorial side. And most hybrid publishers also won't make that investment. So most self-publishing never has the distribution necessary to hit like the New York Times. And almost all hybrid publishers also do not have the distribution required to hit the New York Times. That is traditionally, historically, that has been a feature set that only belonged to traditional publishing. They had distribution. Remember, they have that channel of they sell to distributors who sell to retailers who sell to consumers. Those sales report through BookScan, and those retailers report to the New York Times. And that was a feature set only available to traditional publishing. About 2 years ago, our team started to notice something very unusual. We noticed a hybrid publishing company that hit the New York Times repeatedly. They hit with, and they were signing pretty big authors like Glenn Beck, John Maxwell, Joan London, like Mike and Peggy Rowe. And these are major books that were hybrid published that were hitting the New York Times. So we established contact with them. We wanted to figure out what was going on here. How are they pulling this off? Because previous to a couple of years ago, we'd always been told it was impossible, and we had never seen evidence that it was possible. Well, as we built a relationship with this team, we came to find out something incredibly powerful. This company was started by some very high-powered, formerly traditional publishing executives, and they were able to structure an arrangement where they are a hybrid publisher, but their books are edited. They have the editorial level of like a major 5 New York publisher, and they actually have distribution through Simon & Schuster. So it's not like Simon & Schuster. It is Simon & Schuster. It is a hybrid published book that is printed on Simon & Schuster printing presses. It is shipped from the Simon & Schuster warehouse. The Simon & Schuster sales team calls on retailers the way they would for a normal Simon & Schuster book. And it has the same distribution chain, the supply chain, so to speak, as an actual traditionally published Simon & Schuster book. And that is why they were hitting the New York Times. They figured out a way to where hybrid publishing could move one step closer to traditional publishing, but it stays just inside the line of traditional publishing in that you own your IP, you control the creative, the author gets to determine the title. But then here's the other awesome thing that they do. The author doesn't have to pay to print all the books. The publisher pays to print, they pay for the initial print run to satisfy the initial retail estimated sales. That is another massive feature set that historically was only available through traditional publishing. So that is when the world changed, is we said, this version of hybrid publishing is as close to traditional publishing. It's all the editorial, it's the distribution, it's the supply chain, it's being bestseller list eligible, it's producing a book that is world-class, with you cannot tell the difference between it and a normal major book. And yet you can own the IP, control the creative. Now you do still have to pay the cost. So that's the one sort of downside, is you still have to pay, because you have to pay to produce the book, but there's all these other things. And that was when AJ and I said, we think with that, we started a partnership with them. We created our own imprint, which is called Mission Driven Press. And so now we offer hybrid publishing through Mission Driven Press, but that has distribution through Simon & Schuster, and it has all the editorial and all of these things. And so we said, we'll go first as authors. We believe in this so much. We're going to abandon traditional publishing, which was something we spent years of our life. It was a desperate dream of mine to do. And we're abandoning that for what we believe is more of the future, at least for our audience, which is hybrid publishing. And that's why we started Mission Driven Press.
And I think it's really important, because I think the whole concept of being able to, have a legitimate best-selling book that is truly bought by other humans, which is a really important part of the integrity of the process, was a really validating moment of, this is a space that we could really get into. The other really validating moment for us was, and I think that most really successful brands, no matter what they are, they succeed because they were really solving a problem for themselves. And they realized that if they had that problem, others did too. And I think one of the things that made me want to get into this is when we went through years, and continue to go through years, of trying to make editorial changes to Rory's previous books, including titles and covers, and being told, I know that it's your book, but no, can't change the title, can't change the cover, can't change the words in the book. No. And it's like, but we have all this proof of, if we did these things, that it would have a big impact. It would make more sales. You would make more money, publisher. The answer is no. And realizing that even though you wrote the book and it's your IP, what really happens in traditional publishing is you sell your IP. It's no longer yours. And to have that realization before, during, and after, as anyone who's a content creator, and I just want to put it in a personal context of, those are your stories, and you are giving them away in exchange for dollars and cents, right? They're not yours anymore. Those frameworks, those points, the stories, the content is no longer yours, and many times not even the derivative rights to do more things with that. You have sold that for a payment. It's no longer yours. And I don't know if people really understand that as they step into that. And that was a very eye-opening moment for us when we had all this statistical proof and data of how all of these other things that were happening with a different title change would move the needle. And we couldn't. We were told no, because at the end of the day, it's not really ours anymore. And the thing that was, again, something where we're like, man, this should never happen again, is believing that no editor has the right to tell you that this can't be published when it's yours. Sorry, this part of that story, I know it's true, but it's too much for here, right? These words, that name, can't use those. And that's a really sobering moment for the accuracy of your story and the heart of your content. And just realizing as a content creator that you are giving that up for a paycheck. And sometimes that's okay. And in others, it's not. And when it's not, having a good alternative like a hybrid publisher really made a lot of sense. And so that's another component of just realizing those, like, this really is something you are giving away. Now for money, but it is not yours anymore. And I think we stepped into this going like, hey, our story is not for sale at any cost. It is not for sale. We're going to tell it the way that it happened and the way that we want. Now, I think with all that said, as we stepped into launching mission-driven press, there was another realization we're going to talk about for the next 10 minutes of this interview. Okay, great. Talks a lot about the ability to hit a bestseller list. How do you actually do that? Right. And I don't care if you're self, hybrid, or traditional. How do you do that? Because that doesn't matter. It's the same amount of work, right, to make that all happen. But I think one of the things that is really important to note is that there is a huge gap. And this is across all three options, self, hybrid, and traditional. No one actually knows how to market and sell their book. And so even as we were working with this awesome partner that has this distribution, and it's like there was still this interesting gap of the publisher and the author really not knowing what to do, spending funds in the wrong places at the wrong times, doing things in the wrong order, not probably paying enough attention to the sales and marketing side of things like titles, subtitles, covers. Those are marketing things, but really a lack of knowledge and awareness of what it takes to actually move books, right? What's the work involved? What's the investment involved? What's actually required to sell enough books to take a run at a bestseller list? But then also, I think it's a equally as important thing to realize the other big gap was just knowing when to do it, right? Because so many things in life, it's all about timing. Launching your book is no different. It's about timing. And I think that as we stepped into this, and that's why this is really a sister company of Brand Builders Group, which is a personal brand strategy firm. This is the fulfillment side of book strategy, right? But you got to have a good writing plan, a good writing strategy. You have to have a good publishing strategy. That's mission-driven press. But there also had to be a good sales and marketing strategy to go and execute. And what authors don't realize is that authors are the salespeople, and I think that is where we really said, hey, we're going to fill this gap that's clearly missing. There is no mystery of what it takes to sell books. It's just some people choose not to do it. Whether they don't know it or they choose not to do it, right? And that you can be in either category, but there is not a secret. It takes work, and that work is very specific. So, Rory, if we could just move in for the next 10 minutes to talk about the sales and marketing side of what it actually takes to have a best-selling book, that would be great. And if we could also incorporate the timing component, right? So when we think about marketing, selling, and the timing of those things, the nuance of that, what would you tell the audience is the most important thing to know about how to market your book, how to sell your book, and when to publish your book?
Yeah. So one of our Brand Builders Group mantras that we say all the time is that writers write, editors edit, publishers publish, distributors distribute, retailers retail, and nobody sells the book. Nobody knows how to sell the book. Nobody wants to do the work of selling the book. Nobody has a plan for selling the book. And typically, most authors and publishers and literary agents and publicists spend all of their time and money thinking that publicity and PR or social media are going to be the things to sell books. And while we believe in publicity and we believe in social media, those rank towards the very bottom of the list of things that we know that actually move books. There's lots of great reasons to do social media and PR, but if you think those are going to be the things that actually cause people to pull their credit card out and buy the book, you will find that you are very mistaken. And we've seen this time and time again. So one of the things, if you really want your book to be a bestseller, first of all, I think high level, you got to understand the big buckets of what's going on here. And so we talk about, again, at missiondrivenpress.com, we sort of lay this out. There's four, like when people say, I want to write a book, there's actually four major phases of that project. Phase one is writing the book. Historically, Brand Builders Group has always been able to assist people with writing the book. We help them find their uniqueness. We help them create their frameworks. We create the big idea. We can help them create an outline for it. We can introduce them to ghostwriters if they need them. But it's writing the book. That's like stage one. Stage two is publishing the book, which is, publishers don't sell books. Publishers make books. Publishers don't know much about selling books. A lot of authors think they would, but that's not what publishing is. Publishing is about making books. It's about the editorial. It's about the distribution. It's about all the million decisions about what makes a great book, but it's not so much about selling it. And that's a big mistake that people make. So inside of publishing the book, there are the three options we've talked about mostly on this podcast, right? That's what we've been talking about. Stage three is selling the book. So you write the book, then you publish the book, but now you got to sell the book. And this is where our deepest level of expertise is at Brand Builders Group, is teaching people a replicable system, a duplicatable system, a proven system to get real humans to buy your book. And when I say we have a system for this, as of last week, we had our 51st Brand Builders Group client who has followed our system and become a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or USA Today national best-selling author. We've done that over 50 times in the last couple of years. And what we don't do is we don't tell authors to buy their own books. If anyone ever says what you should do is buy your own books, that you should run, right? Number one, it's very risky to do that. And it's number two, there's some questionable ethics around buying your own books just to make them count for the bestseller list. But number three, it doesn't accomplish the actual goal, which is changing lives, helping people, and also building your brand and your business. So what we do is we teach a system, and there's 7 main mechanisms that we teach people for how to sell books. Okay. And we'll deep dive on those for a minute here. But then you have stage 4, which is processing the books or reporting the books. So you write the book, writing the book, publishing the book, selling the book, and then reporting the sales. And when it comes to where the rubber meets the road of making sure your sales report, to become a bestseller list or become a bestselling author, you have to make sure that your sales, whatever sales you generate, whether that's 50 books or 5,000 or 50,000 books, happen in the appropriate way so that they get recognized by the reporting outlets. We're not trying to game the system. We're not trying to cheat. We're not trying to lie. We're not trying to make it look like you're selling more books than you are. We're just trying to make sure that every single hard-earned sale that you created gets counted. And that's it, right? So that's what we're trying to do. And so we actually provide that service for free for anyone who's a Brand Builders Group client, whether they publish with Mission Driven Press or not. If we're helping you write the book or we're doing the sales strategy, we do that part because we want your hard-earned work to be recognized. We're not really in just the business of doing that. We just do that as a service because there's a lot of people who do it wrong and there's a lot of misconceptions. And frankly, there's a lot of shadiness around it and a lot of disorganization, and a lot of people have lost a lot of money. And so we just said, we're going to just take care of this piece and we're going to provide it for free. And we don't care if you sell 10,000 or 100,000 or 10 books. I mean, we want to help you sell. I just mean, it's not like we will only provide that service to like the big famous authors we work with. We provide it for everybody because we were aspiring authors at one point too. So that's the 4 stages. Now, if we deep dive here, what AJ's asking about is, how do we sell books? That's stage 3. What are the mechanisms? Okay. So I already told you the biggest thing that does not sell a lot of books is PR and social media, which is ironic because that's what everybody thinks will sell books. And I just want to spend a minute on this. PR is very important. PR is huge for brand building. If you do PR right, it can be huge for list building. But PR in and of itself, going on Good Morning America and thinking that's going to sell all your books is not a very good strategy because it's very, very difficult to get that slot. And when you get that slot, if you get that slot, which is, 1 in 100,000, you'll be shocked at how little books it sells. And we have clients every week who are on like every month for sure, that are on Good Morning America, Fox News, Today Show, various things with Oprah, and several of the biggest podcasters in the world are clients of ours, right? Lewis Howes and Amy Porterfield and Ed Milet. We know exactly how many books are sold from being on those shows. But a national TV hit usually sells somewhere between 800 to 1,200 units. So it's not nothing, right? But it's a very far cry from 18,000 units if you're trying to make a run at a New York Times, or, tens of thousands of units if you're trying to change the world. It's not going to happen that way.
Now, there are a couple of PR mediums that we have seen that are better to do, such as podcasts.
Yeah,
right?
podcasts are a high return on the buck for how small the audience is. So like the biggest podcasts in the world typically are not going to move as much as a Good Morning America hit, but the audience they're reaching is much smaller. So as a percentage, because you go, let's take our book about personal branding. If we're on a podcast that only has 100,000 downloads, but all 100,000 people are entrepreneurs, we'll sell way more books to 100,000 entrepreneurs who listen to us on a 30-minute podcast interview than we will being on Good Morning America, reaching millions of people for a 3-minute segment, of which only a small fraction of them are entrepreneurs. So podcasts actually are a great strategy, because one of the things that we talk about is you have to think of your online audience as an offline room. And sometimes authors go, oh, I don't want to be on that podcast. It's a small podcast. It only gets, 1,000 downloads a month. But if you were standing on stage in front of 1,000 people, you probably would take that opportunity. You probably would be excited about that. And that's more of what podcasts are like. It's 1,000 people focused on you, giving you their full attention for 20, 30, 40 minutes. So we're big fans of podcasts. Now, you have to have strategies for how to convert those. And this is what it comes down to. I know we're running short on time. Here's how you sell books: incentives. In one word, the secret is incentives. And what you do is you give people additional incentives to order the book. And I'll just share with you a really quick tip here. Here's how to sell 50,000 books. I can teach you this in 60 seconds. What you do is you get 10,000 people to buy one copy. And so you give some people some extra incentives if they buy one copy. Then you get 1,000 people. You try to find 1,000 people who will buy 10 copies. And so you come up with a few more incentives that they get if they buy 10 copies. And then we want to get 100 people to each buy 100 copies, and they get a really big incentive. And that's another 10,000 units. Then you want to find 10 people who will each buy 1,000 copies. That's another 10,000 copies. A great incentive there would be to like give away a speech and say, hey, if you buy 1,000 copies of my book, I'll come speak, or I'll make an appearance, or something like that. And then if you can, you try to find one person who would buy 10,000 copies, and that might be like $300,000. So you'd have to give them some really, really, really big incentives. But
you let us know when you find those people, because we would like to meet them.
And there are those people out there. There are those people.
Indeed.
So incentives. And that's part of what our team helps you do, is help you think through those strategies, think through those incentives. We've got templates and scripts and examples. But the point is, get real people to buy your book. And yes, we'll use incentives to help them, but people know they're buying books. We're talking about the book. They're real humans with real transactions, and you're doing the hard work it takes to create a movement and change lives. And if all goes well, our team will help make sure, hopefully, those sales get reported properly, and hopefully those sales get counted and you get listed as a best-selling author. And we've got a great track record of doing it, because we're trying to do it the right way. We're trying to do it openly, honestly, in transparency with retailers, with publishers, and with authors. It's not about trying to just buy your own books to game the system. It's doing the work it takes to tell the world about your book, and that your book deserves to have that work.
Yeah. And I would say one of the things I think it's really important to kind of sum a lot of that up is like, that is sales, y'all. Like that is when the author has to step into the role of salesperson. And a lot of authors that we know, that we have encountered, they're writers, they're content creators, they're in the words. And this is having you step off the pages and picking up the phone, making phone calls, sending emails, getting on podcasts, getting on stages. And part of the incentivized system is sales psychology, right? It's a reward system. You give me your money now for nothing because you're not going to get a book right now, but I'm going to give you this, and this, and you're going to get the book later, right? This is a sales psychology. It's a reward-based system of stepping into an arena that maybe you're not aware of, maybe you're not even comfortable with, but that is at the end of the day what moves books. We do this all day, every day with new authors, every single day, every week, having launches. And I can tell you right now, the people who go, I will sell my book. Those are the books that sell. The people who say, I will pick up the phone, I will send the emails, I will do the podcast, I will do the speeches, they sell books. And I think this is the last thing that I would like to leave on. Now, why would someone do that? Like,
Yeah,
why would someone do that?
well, on this point, Robert Kiyosaki had a great quote on this. He said, you have to remember, it's not called New York Times best writing author. It's New York Times best selling author. This is a sales game. And like anything, whoever is selling the most is getting the word out there. And by the way, we do this for new authors. We also do this for the biggest authors in the world, right? John Maxwell, Ed Milet, Lewis Howes, Amy Porterfield. Like, we have helped Eric Thomas, E.T. the Hip Hop Preacher. We've helped some of the most reputable, credible personal brands in the world build their brand by helping them do this stuff. We've had 3 of our clients have followed our system and pre-sold 100,000 copies of their book, like pre-sold during their launches. So this stuff works at the highest level, and it works if you're just starting out. But the reason you would want to be a bestseller is statistically you make a lot more money in advances, in speaking fees. You get better media opportunities. I mean, look, just to use Lewis Howes as an example, because he's a client and a close friend. Everybody wants to be on Lewis Howes' podcast. Everybody. It's one of the biggest podcasts in the world. And every week, his team gets flooded with books that get mailed to them. And when they open those books, there's 2 piles. There's the no pile, and there's the maybe pile. Being a New York Times best-selling author doesn't automatically put you in some type of a yes pile, but it pretty much almost always puts you automatically in the maybe pile. So you're going to separate, it's the what is it, the wheat from the chaff. Like, you get separated from the crowd, that you get a real legitimate, honest look by literary agents, by publicists, by speaking opportunities, by being invited to be in part of VIP groups and stuff like that. But I do want to just leave everybody with this, AJ. It's really important to know that you should do this, and we're really good at it, and we teach you straightforward practices that are ethical. There's no manipulation, there's no deception. It is just hard work, but we give you the templates, we give you the tools. That's what our clients pay us for. And you should want to do this because you want to sell a lot of books, right? But you have to remember, bestseller lists don't change lives, but books do. Bestseller lists, they don't really change lives. They might change your life. If anything, they'll change one person's life. They will change the author's life. But nobody in the world cares if you're a best-selling author. They care about, can you help me? Could you have advice, insights, inspiration that will help me in my life? But either way, to reach a lot of people, you need to do the work of getting the book out there. So bestseller lists are fun to go after. They are meaningful. They do matter, but they're not the thing. Nowhere near are they the ultimate goal here. They're a fun game as a checkpoint to kind of go after, but this is about changing lives. This is about helping people. This is about making a difference in the world. And it's also about helping you build your brand and your business by getting your message out there. So we try to, we want to pursue bestseller lists. We think that we're pretty good at it. We got a strong track record, but it's not the end goal. It's a side goal of going, let's help you get your book into many people's hands as possible so that your book can make the world a better place. That's what this is about. That's why you started. Bestseller lists don't change lives, but books do.
Yeah. And I would just add, like, why would you want to do all of this? It's a calling. right? You can't not.
Amen.
It's a calling. It's something that's been placed on your heart that you feel like you have something that has the power to help someone else. And having it in writing, words on pages, it matters because you know that if somebody else reads it, it can help them. It's a calling. And it has to be that first because then all the work is worth it. And it doesn't matter how many copies are sold. It's worth it knowing that it could potentially change the trajectory of someone else's life. It's a calling. That's why you do it. And so we're so excited to be a part of Mission Driven Press. We're so excited to be able to more deeply serve our community. And if you are an aspiring author or you're in the middle of writing that book, or you've got your book done and you're trying to launch it, I would encourage you guys, go check out our website, missiondrivenpress.com. Fill out our author form and tell us about your book. So Mission Driven Press, there is a form that says, tell us about your book. If it's a future book, it's a book in motion, it's a book heading into launch at any stage, we want to hear about it, see how we can come alongside you, see what we can do to help you get that book into the hands of people that it can help. So missiondrivenpress.com, fill out the form. And y'all, thank you so much for listening. Rory, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Everyone else, we will see you next time on The Influential Personal Brand.